about some of the veteran political action committees. There are a couple on either side, and one of the problems that they've sort of had is that PACs are really about parties, and so if you try to make them about veterans, it sometimes becomes more about veterans being, sort of using the veteran voice to sort of advance one side or the other. And what's cool about VetPAC is it really has stayed true to being a veteran PAC and supporting veteran candidates. And so a lot of the people we've talked to here, he's been working with for quite some time, and can ask him some questions about that. Hopefully I'll have some good war stories for us. So I'm going to start off with Denise. Can you just talk a little bit about the legalities of that I've been talking about, and give you some more actual information, legal information.
Okay, I can do that. First, my name is Denise Krepp, and I'm here, and I'm here to talk to you guys about legal issues. But before I do that, I'd like to get an idea of where everybody's from. Are you guys, who's Army? Wow. Navy? Air Force? Marine? And there's got to be a Coastie. Please tell me there's a Coastie in this room. Am I the only Coastie in this room? Oh, I've got long legs, as the Navy folks know, so I can walk to shore when our ship sinks. So we're good there. Okay. Just want to make sure. Yeah, okay.
I served the Coast Guard at one time.
Oh, thank you.
I'm a Navy chaplain.
Oh.
I served at the Coast Guard Academy.
Oh, good place to serve. All right. Well, I've got a couple of documents that I want to talk to you guys about, and these are kind of like your bedside reading, just in case you can't go to sleep at night. There are a couple of documents that you're going to need as candidates. First document is the Department of Defense Directive. It's number 1344.
And that's in your field manual. Michael, what was the page again?
126.
There we go.
Okay. Do you have all of it in your field manual? All right, let's turn to it, please. Let's start talking about it. Sorry to do this to you, but let's do this.
I can get you a manual so you can look at that.
Oh, I've got it. Okay, so we're going to look at this now. We're going to look at this document. Now, my question to all of you is: do you know how this came about? How do you think this came about? Well, the Hatch Act, right? Okay. So what usually you've got a piece of law that comes about. That's the Hatch Act. Then you've got additional laws that came about, and that's one of the, when you start looking at the references in this document, you start looking at sections 973, 888, 101, and Chapter 47 of Title 10. So when you've got the law, then it gets codified in different parts of the statute, usually in Title 10. And then the next step, what usually happens is you either put it in a Federal Register notice, creating a regulation, or it comes into a policy. Now this policy was written in 2008. The last law update was in 2003, so essentially it took 5 years for this to be updated. And I want to talk to you about this because this is a big document for you to look at. When you have something like this, what usually happens is somebody gets told, write a document. In this case, it was probably update a document. So somebody with the Department of Defense was told to update the document. So they updated it. Now, you don't merely just have a Deputy Secretary of Defense sign it. What you end up doing is it's vetted through all the various departments. So it goes through the Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps, the Air Force, and because it talks about the Coast Guard, it would also go through the Department of Homeland Security. So it's a very, very well vetted document, which means that a lot of people saw it and a lot of people wrote their edits. So it's written for specific reasons, and part of it because of the Hatch Act, and part of it because somebody probably did something they weren't supposed to do, therefore they wanted to address it in here. Okay, so that's how this thing comes about. The reason I say that you want to keep this as your bedside reading is it provides you with kind of a general framework of what you can and you cannot do. Okay, and it's pretty it's pretty open. It says may and it says shall. So when you work your way through it, you see your references, which we talked about. We see the purpose, which is talking about the policies, and you talk about the applicability. Now, the applicability of this document is focusing a lot on active duty members, active National Guard, as well as active reservists. And you want to focus on that is because that is where the focus is on what you can and cannot do. Okay, so when you work your way through this document, it says a member of the armed forces. Now, who knows the difference between armed forces and armed services? You guys know there's a difference statutory between armed forces and armed services? The difference is the armed forces is the 5. It's the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, and the Coast Guard. Armed services includes the public health. So that's the difference. So you always want to focus, make sure it's armed forces. Okay. Then this is when you work your way through 4.1. I hate to be like we're in law school, but I just kind of want to walk you way through it. It says active duty may. And the reason I want to work your way through this is because you as candidates are going to have a lot of supporters who are currently military folks. And if they're going to want to help you because, they've served with you, and they're going to want to say, hey, what can I do? And you're going to want to say, this is what you can do. So you work your way through 4.1, and 4.1 starts talking about how folks can register, they can vote, they can join a partisan political club, they can serve as an election official. You can sign petitions, you can write letters. But what a lot of this language is focusing on is the fact that you cannot do this as an official representative of the armed forces. You can't say, I am Denise Krepp and I am doing this because I am a Coast Guard officer. What you can say is, I am Denise Krepp and I'm doing this as a private citizen. And there's a difference, and the difference comes about from the fact that our military has traditionally been nonpartisan. And I want you to remember that, and I want you to reinforce that with the folks who support you, because the reason we have been successful in the United States is because we have had a military that has stayed in the barracks. Does everybody understand when I say staying in the barracks? Who knows? Who can tell me what that means?
We haven't staged a military junta.
Exactly. Exactly. And that is very important. We keep the military in the barracks. And people, regardless of party, so it doesn't mean if you're a Democrat or it doesn't mean if you're a Republican, they're going to feel the same way. You stay in the barracks, okay? So that's why when you have members who are going to say, what can I help you do? You say you do it as a private citizen, okay? As long as you remember this, as a private citizen, you can do things. Private citizen, not in uniform, all right? Make sure your folks remember, they can't do this in uniform. And that's what makes the DOD jittery, and that's going to make the Department of Homeland Security jittery when Coast Guard folks get involved, is when they start seeing people, somehow representing that they are, officers of the Defense Department, officers of Homeland Security. So just remember that, okay? Now when you flip over and you start looking at the next page, 4.1.2 says you shall not. Well, the first one they say is participate in partisan political fundraising activities. You have to read through that, and the key here is you can participate. You can go to an event in your private capacity, but you can only attend. You're not supposed to be, the leader of your local Democratic club. You're not supposed to be the leader of your local Republican club. You're not supposed to be publishing partisan political articles. I mean, you've got to make sure that you keep it clean, that you can participate, but you're not leading these efforts. And again, leading these efforts means that you're staying in the barracks, and you're just doing this as a private citizen. So just when you start thinking about who the folks are that are working with you, just remind them of that fact. Again, and I'm going to focus of, if you're active duty, you cannot participate in gatherings. You can't talk on radio shows. You can't do your surveys. Here's an interesting one. If you look at 4.1.2.8, performing clerical or other duties for a partisan political committee or candidate during a campaign on election day. I'm willing to bet there's a specific person who did this. Because when you look at that specificity, somebody did this. And the question is, who did it? And this is how they're trying to clean it up to make sure that nobody else does this type of thing again. Okay, so you're working your way through what you can and cannot do. And again, a lot of this is focusing on active duty folks. Now, who in here is currently active duty? We're going to work our way through this. Who is a reservist? Okay. Who is National Guard? Okay, because we're going to work our way through, because there are three different components.
Quick question. Inactive Red Reserves, so the IRR, how do we fit in there? So if we're contractually obligated to, like, we're still in service, so
We're still on service.
And stuff, but I don't, I get called in like once every 2 years.
Are you okay, let's sort through three. So you've already done your military time.
Yes, ma'am. 4 years active.
4 years, you're on your 4 years inactive, and you're not a drilling IRR?
No, ma'am. So my contract ends in like 2015, but unless we like go to World War III, like I don't have to do anything.
I would say you're in political no man's land right now with this document, to be very honest with you, but because I know the ethics officials, in addition to being a Coast Guard officer, I was the chief counsel over the Maritime Administration. As such, I was a political appointee of the Obama administration, so I got to know a lot of the ethics officers very well, because in addition to being very confined as military, political appointees are also very confined to what you can and cannot do. My guess is that they will interpret this very narrowly and very conservatively. So anything, what I'm saying as far as like active duty, think it applies to you, and then we'll work our way through it, okay? So I would just do that. Okay, so you've already working your way through, and this starts talking about what active duty people can't do. Now then you get to 4.2, which talks about nomination of candidacy for civil office. Okay, and an elective office, you're talking about either at the fed or the state level, requires an appointment. There are a lot of appointments that the president does. You can be, to a commission, to a council, an executive schedule. That's also a political appointee. That's essentially what I was. And it's applying to the civil office, and it's also civil offices of states, the District of Columbia territory, and possession. And that was the 2003 change, which means that somebody in the District of Columbia or Guam or Puerto Rico or somebody else did something that got the defense hackles up, and they made the changes here. Okay, now look at this, and this is where it gets really interesting. 4.2.2 says a regular member or retired regular or reserve. Okay, sorry, and this is where I am going to get lawyer. Regular member, comma. Let's start looking at your grammar here. Or retired regular or reserve component member on active duty under a call of order to an active duty for more than 270 days. So that means less than a year, but more than 270. So that's going to be your trigger here on the 270. May not be a nominee or candidate for the office except when the secretary concerned grants permission. Secretary concerned can be defined both as Secretary of Defense, because that'll be the defense. It would also be the Secretary of Homeland Security when the Coast Guard is operating under the Department of Homeland Security. Coast Guard, however, in times of war, which is declared, would be operating under the Department of Defense, so Coast Guard would go to DOD. But that's how you define Secretary concern. Okay, so unless the Secretary says you can do this, all right?
Could that also include the Secretary of the Navy, Secretary of the Army for your service specific?
I read this as being Secretary of Defense. I read this as the Secretary of the Department of Defense, and I think that it goes up that high because this is a very touchy issue, and that's where they've got. Now, that being said, what I didn't talk about is we do have members of Congress that are reservists. Lindsey Graham is a colonel. He's one of two. So that's a very interesting one. We also have Beau Biden, who was this Attorney General for Delaware, who went on active duty for a year. And I'm going to bring that up in a second because you can do it. It's just, in the military when you get told at times you've got one hat and then a transition occurs and then you've got another hat? What we're going to be doing is talking a little bit about how do you do the transition from one hat to another hat. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So you can do some of this. Again, this is going to start talking about regular, so we've got this. And so you work your way through 4.2.1.2. Then you work your way back to the next part, and it starts talking about how you do some of this. Now, if you are going to do this as a regular member of the military, you have to seek permission, okay? And that permission has to be in writing. And if you're going to do something like this, give yourself plenty of time. Because if there's one thing I've learned about the federal government, it moves very, very slowly. And when you get something like this, and I'm willing to bet you have folks in here who probably can tell you about the process if they've been on active duty, that it goes through many layers. It doesn't just pop up on a secretary's desk. It usually pops up in your lower level, then it gets vetted by the lawyer, who is probably the local area, then it goes up, and they do a little bit of hand-wringing of, okay, what do we do? And then they make a decision. That decision-making takes time. So just build some time into it. All right.
So just to be clear, if you're a drilling reservist, not on orders for more than 270 days, you still need to request written permission?
Okay, this is where we need to work our way through this. No, you don't. Okay, let's see if I have to find this. Here's more than 270 days. And by the way, it's really going to depend on, okay, when you're drilling reservists, so you're drilling but you haven't been activated.
That's right.
Yeah. Oh, did you go to law school?
No.
Okay, you'd be a really good lawyer. These are the hypotheticals that happen when you go to law school. Okay, let's work our way through this. So you've got the 4.2. Say this.
Taking law courses, but
Okay.
it's not the same as law school. So.
All right, well, let's work our way through this. Do you mind if I keep working our way through this? I'm sorry, this is going to get into the minutia. All right, so you're working your way through. You've got 4.2. Oh, and by the way, before we get to that, can I work our way through just methodically? Okay. Here's a kicker on 4.2.2.4. You gotta love some of these numbers. This one becomes a nominee or candidate for civil office prior to commencing active duty. Then the member must request permission in writing and submit the request to the secretary concerned before entering active duty. Okay? So this is, they're going to address different hypotheticals of being active duty and then going into elective office and then holding or trying to get holding elective office and then trying also going to the military at the same time. So they're kind of addressing both issues. Okay? And one thing I do want to note about this is that this document provides kind of your general framework. Does it have everything in it? No, and if it doesn't have it in there, I'm guessing what they're going to do is say, what's the best applicable manner that's already in here and how do we apply it? Because given the fact that it took 5 years to write this and update it, it's going to take a heck of a long time to update it again. So just keep it there. All right, here we go. Your 4.2.3, answers this. Retired regular or reserve component on active duty, member on active duty under call of orders or fewer may remain or become a candidate for office, provided there's also no interference. So this is 270 days or fewer. So if you're 270, if you're activated for more than 270,
That's when you need permission.
yes.
Got it.
But if it's fewer, so here you go, member of active duty, retired or reserve component under 270 less than, okay? But, all right, let's go to the wiggle area, the gray area of, are you a drilling reservist and do you know that you're about to be deployed for more than 270 days and you declared your candidacy?
I would assume that would require written permission.
Yes. So I wouldn't recommend anybody say, well, I'm not going to do it because I haven't actually deployed. Well, if you know your unit's going to be deploying in the next
But
year
short
or
of that
two.
knowledge,
Yes.
Under 270 orders.
Yes.
should
This
comply
is
without written
right. And the other part of this, and I should have said this up front, I am providing you with general information, but your best friend in any of your campaigns is always going to be a lawyer. Get a lawyer sitting next to you. I mean, I'm sorry. I mean, I understand Shakespeare said something like killing all lawyers or something, equally as, supportive of lawyers.
The first rule of revolution.
Right, but get a lawyer next to you, okay? Because in addition to me reading all of these laws out to you, they're going to be state laws. And I live in the District of Columbia. I don't know what Montana requires, okay? So make sure you have a lawyer sitting right next to you.
Person who represents himself as a bullet client.
Yeah, don't do that either. But yeah, so get the lawyer next to you. Okay. So you've got a lot of provisions, and then we've got some really, again, somebody must have done something. 4.2.4.1 talks about school boards for enlisted folks. And this, I'm not sure if there was a drafting change or what happened, but you also, when you start talking about warrants and commissioned officers, you start talking about independent school boards. So now not are we talking about federal, state level, but we're also talking about school boards, okay? And again, trying to cover every contingency possible. Okay. This is where 4.3 is where I think some folks have been tripped up, and I think you've heard a lot of folks who may have attracted additional attention to themselves because what they did was they said, all right, I'm in the military, therefore that is going to be my big primary picture of myself. I'm going to put a picture of myself and that's going to be all I've got on my pamphlets. No, don't do that, okay? I mean, you're running for candidate for an elected office because you are a smart individual and because you served in the military, but that's just one part of your life. Okay, people are not going to vote for you solely because you are a veteran. They're going to vote for you because you have the entire package. So remember that when you start looking at your brochures and you start putting, stuff on your websites, it cannot be, you with this big, huge, picture of you in a uniform. Okay, put it as part of the entire package. And also, not only do you put it as part of the entire package, you've got to put the disclaimer on there that it talks about in here, saying that this, you are not being endorsed by the Department of Defense. Okay, and again, it goes back to the philosophy of the military stays in the barracks. All right, just keep remembering that, and it's just, remember to put the endorsement on, remember that you keep it small and you keep it proportional, and you should be okay. Now, if somebody's going to challenge you and say, well, it's 55% of your literature, it should be 35%, and I'm going to go to the Department of Defense and I'm going to make them give me a ruling, I can guarantee you the Department of Defense is not going to come out with a ruling on that issue. They're going to go, oh golly, Miss Molly, oh no, I don't want to do that, because then it's going to be held. Use your best judgment. Now, what we called in law school was the regular man thought. I mean, just judgment. What would a normal person do? Okay, so that's kind of the caveat I can give you there. And then we get into 4.3.3, which is a very interesting provision. It says, yes, we gave you permission to run as a regular armed services or somebody who's drilling more than 270 days, but you can't participate in your campaign. I mean, it's like, wow, well that just kind of hampers you all over the place, doesn't it? Read this one carefully. I've read it about 5 times, and what I can't make head or tails of it. I'm not sure how. 4.3.3. It literally says any member on active duty is permitted to be, or otherwise not prohibited from being. That was really encompassing. A nominee or candidate for office, as described in subparagraph 4.2.1, may not participate in any campaign activities.
Denise, would that include? You say active duty, could that be a reservist in a drill status? So that might be what they're referring to. We were just talking about Mark Kirk, who tweeted something about being at the National Command Center on reserve duty, and then was hit for they considered campaigning while on active duty.
Possibly, but you bring up a good issue here, and I want to. Wowzers. Okay, how many of you are currently federal government employees? Okay, so you've probably already gone through the ethics training. What state, if you're a federal government employee and if you're also in the military, what you do has got to be what you're doing on government time. You're not supposed to be doing anything else private on government time. Okay? And this is what the ethics people are going to talk to you about are you supposed to be having political literature in your office when you're on a federal installation? Absolutely not. Okay? Are you allowed to have a sign? And it actually talks about it in here. If you are living, let's bring up the example of Fort Bragg. You have a lot of privatized housing that's now coming on the military. You're not being put into those nice old duplexes that I remember as a kid living in. They're no privatized housing. But they're privatized housing on federal property. You're not allowed to put a sign up. You're not allowed to put a huge sign up in your car. You're allowed to do a bumper sticker. However, this is, and I know the Department of Transportation, had a very narrow interpretation of this. It says in here that you're allowed to have a bumper sticker, but what if you have a bumper sticker and you're driving it onto a federal installation, or if you have a bumper sticker and you're driving into a federal building? What some lawyers are interpreting in some of the departments is you need to take that bumper sticker off. Okay, so they're going to be interpreting this very narrowly, and it doesn't matter if you're Dem, it doesn't matter if you're Republican. It's just the philosophy of the military states and the barracks. But it goes into that definition. You're also not supposed to be tweeting. I'll get to that. Should you be tweeting while you're on active duty status? Probably not a good idea. Okay, should you be tweeting? If you are a reservist on active duty, as a government person, should you be tweeting, what your thoughts and opinions are? Should you be going on Facebook on some of this stuff? Use some judgment. Use some judgment, okay? Don't do it on federal time. Don't do it on federal property. And just think about how somebody could use it against you, which is essentially what happened there. Of why is he doing this on government time? Okay, just be smart about this, because everything that you put out in the open, somebody is going to use against you. Okay, regardless of what if you thought it was a bright idea at 10 o'clock at night or 2 o'clock in the morning.
So if
be
you
careful.
Come back from drill weekend on Monday morning and said, just spent a great drill weekend with my buddies in the Pentagon, that would have been okay. Non-government. So Sorry.
and then put the
That's a great question.
no, it really is it's a really good question.
Is there a differentiation between an official campaign, Facebook or Twitter, versus the ones being used individually? Because that would say Mark Kirk. So he technically is doing that as an individual, saying, the fact that he is in public office, I would think that
Okay,
would differentiate
let's
on
just-
Monday morning, looking back on the weekend.
As my philosophy is a political point. I mean, I've held several different jobs in my life. I was a political appointee in the Obama administration. I was also the senior counsel in the House Homeland Security Committee. And for both of those, and before that I worked for TSA, and before that I worked for Coast Guard. Regardless of what I did and where I was at, I was always cognizant of how it would reflect on somebody else or my boss, which meant that I was very, very conservative. And I would recommend that you be very, very conservative, because it's very hard for somebody to differentiate between you and your private account and you as a political appointee. There are a lot of smart people in this room. You're probably a lot smarter than a lot of other folks. And if people don't understand the difference, they're going to confuse it. So be very conservative about this.
And I didn't show this Esquire article before, but after that thing with Mark Kirk, there's a whole bunch of here are all the people who are in violation of this DoD directive, and it really wasn't. There were, so the issue I was mentioning before is it's not so much that you're going to get court-martialed for something; it's that it's going to be used against you, like Denise was saying. And so even when it's not technically wrong,
Takes you off your message.
it does takes you off your message,
It does.
and
It
people
does.
can say it's wrong, and it's kind of like they haven't given you a ruling about it, so it's sort of that Esquire article still hasn't been corrected, even though it's fairly obviously incorrect.
Yeah, just be conservative. Be smart about this, okay? And the other one, and I'd recommend, is that your spouses, your children, encourage them to be a little bit more conservative as well. I mean, am I trying to tell you to stop having a First Amendment right? Absolutely not. But I can tell you, having participated in many a campaign, that what you do, what they do, will come back in some way or other.
Now, does this apply mostly to personal campaigns, like someone running for Congress? What about state referendum? Is it the same thing?
It applies. It applies. I mean, if you are running for a state representative job, you're going to find out here.
I'm sorry. I mean, if you are campaigning for, like, say, like something like a state referendum, like school financing law or like gambling
Issue, any elected office.
something issue, is that still considered a
Ballot
partisan
initiative.
Okay.
campaign?
I believe so. I mean, you're never supposed to represent yourself as a member of the armed forces, period, ever. You're never supposed to talk to a camera. You're never supposed to talk to the press. You're never supposed to put your, quote out on a pamphlet. If you're active duty or serving on active status as a reserve, you're never supposed to represent yourself as a member of the armed forces.
But could someone on active duty work for a campaign that's like just say example expanding gambling in Maryland or whatever? Say if someone's for or against, can they work on that campaign as a private citizen if they believe
Citizen.
either way? But if they're saying they're not coming in there saying I'm a veteran, but they're just working for a campaign, not for any political party, but for an issue that they believe that's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah,
In
you
your
can do
personal
that.
time.
Yes.
In your personal time. So this is,
In your
so
personal
this-
time.
Most of the things are more about your.
You can work on a partisan political campaign on your own personal time as well, as an active member. So it would apply to both a referendum or a political campaign.
And what you want to make sure of is, and because, let's face it, people do like veterans. And then they'd like to say, well, veterans support us, and I have a veteran. You're going to have to say, no, I'm here in my personal capacity. Okay? You just make sure that people also don't try to use the fact that you are a veteran.
Well, when you say veteran, I mean, you can say we veterans for Obama,
Yes.
but you can't say, like,
Personal name.
well, we can say, you can't say, like, we're active duty naval officers.
Right,
for
you
Obama.
can't do
Lieutenant
that.
so-and-so.
Yeah, you don't want to give your name. Yeah.
You got it.
Okay. Okay.
There was a gentleman at Rick Santorum's presidential campaign in Iowa. He showed up at the campaign rally in his uniform.
Yeah.
Yep. Nope, can't do that.
Did you see that?
Yeah, well, Ron Paul had some guys that showed up in there.
Yeah.
And try to endorse them.
A couple of
Yeah.
years ago, Governor Virginia, what's his name? Robert
O'Donnell?
O'Donnell.
Yeah.
He did a response to the State of the Union, and right behind him was a bunch of people, including an E5 in the Army, in uniform.
Hey, maybe I can address this.
Bad call.
I've run, and we actually use my pictures of me in uniform for campaign promotional purposes. As long as you put at the bottom of the photo that this is not an approved photo by the Department of Defense and does not connotate an endorsement of the Department of Defense in your candidacy, and you're still a member of the reserve, but you're not on Title 10 status or Title 32 status, you are totally within your rights to use any pictures of you that were ever taken by you or a friend of yours in uniform. I use them in TV ads, I use them on my palm cards, I use them on yard signs. I mean, it is one of your greatest assets. There is a legal way to do it.
Yeah, yes, and I'm sorry. What I don't want to say is no, because that's not my intent. My intent here is just to say, stay within the bounds that they're giving you and be able to do exactly what you did, of doing it the right way. And if you do it the right way, it ensures that you don't have problems.
Has anyone or any organization in uniform requested to be, requested access to somebody's political campaign? Like let's just say I'm in uniform and I want to endorse Seth. Can I request from the DOD to actually attend his rally in my uniform?
You can't, no.
Well, no, the precedent was set last year, so I'm just wondering if anybody's done it since.
You mean with the Ron Paul rally? Is that what you meant? Or
No, the Gay Pride rally in San Diego.
Yeah.
They were actually allowed to march in uniform, and it was authorized by the DOD, which, to my, that's precedent.
Was that considered a
That's-
political?
It was an issue.
It's an issue, right? But I mean,
It was a political issue, yeah, it was a political, the issue was that don't tell gay marriage, get out and vote for California.
Wasn't a gay pride?
For their,
Yeah.
what was their?
To my knowledge, that was limited.
They said that, it's
I-
limited, it's a one.
Exactly, and that's what they said, was that it was a limited event. To my knowledge, no one else has ever done that
That's what I'm
before,
asking.
but has that caused a precedent? Yes.
Yeah.
Is that a precedent that might create a revision for this document? Absolutely. And I'm sure somebody right now is diligently going, okay, how do I address this
I'm
issue?
just wondering if that is like open bucket.
Is there not an exception because the DOD and the federal government in general has their official position essentially be in support of gay rights at that point? In the
Yeah, I still think
Obama administration, the executive branch, they were essentially endorsing it, maybe not in a direct way, but by allowing that exception.
I think
what-
it was still in response
Parades
to
are.
the either way.
Well, okay, here's what you could do in response to that issue. Was the precedent setting? I am willing to bet there was a legal opinion that was written on this issue, because if you're not going by this, then you need a legal opinion stating how what happened in San Diego is consistent with this document. So as a smart person, you would have the ability to FOIA that legal document and say, I would like to see a copy of it.
I think parades are kind of, for that reason, they get away with a lot of them. The St. Patrick's Day Parade in New York City has a lot of military participants as units. And it's sponsored by the Inch Order of Hibernians, which is a Catholic organization. It's
Right.
sponsored by the Archdiocese of New York. So is the military, endorsing the Catholic Church by participation? I don't know.
Well, okay, then if you have to, okay, wow, we're going to flip back and forth here. It says on, at least my page 4, but not in yours, it's 4.1.2, geez Louise, point 10, you shall not march or ride in a partisan political parade.
But that's partisan, that's the key word.
Exactly,
So you
part,
can't march in the Democratic parade.
right, so that, what I'm willing to bet, and that's how they right, they did the legal opinion was that's the word, sir, and you're right. As a chaplain, you know that you have to be very careful about words, and that's what they parsed it on.
So the St. Patrick's Day Parade is not a partisan parade. The Gay Pride Parade is not a partisan parade.
Veterans Day,
Because
you've
there's
got a
one
lot of
thing-
other, yes. But again, this is another reason you keep a lawyer right next to you when you start doing this stuff, because you're going to parse a lot of words.
So I worked in the Senate last year, and that became a very big political issue. We actually requested DOD to explain themselves on this one, and DOD came back with it. It was a DOD general counsel. We got requested from them. They issued an opinion, said it was a very limited time parade.
nonpartisan, and that's how they justify it for that piece. So there is a general counsel opinion out there.
Okay, and I think there was one other question? Yes, sir.
Just one about appearing in uniform and everything. I mean, it's virtually, you can't do it in any campaign event. You cannot be in uniform, with the exception of inviting in color guard.
Right.
To participate, and then again, you have to have a legal opinion and permission. It's got to be a written request, a formal yes, and they're just there to, you can't thank them, you can't do anything. That's about the only time any can ever appear in uniform.
And that's,
Sitting presidents will.
Yeah, if you're already elected, you can have servicemen and women appear in uniform. But if you're elected in campaigning, you cannot. So that's another distinction.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said. Can you repeat that?
If you're already an elected official, you can have public events with servicemen and women in uniform. But if you're a public official that's running for re-election, you cannot.
what they tie is,
It's not a campaign, so.
yes, that's, yeah.
I
I
don't
We'll keep on going. No, we'll keep going through, yeah.
Yeah, I got a question for you. Had a ceremony where a political appointee, not a candidate, but actual representative.
Sorry. Oh, sorry, guys.
Had a ceremony,
Okay,
a ball, and there was a representative that was invited to the ball who just happened to be up for election. Put him in front of hundreds of military personnel. I'm being as vague as I can here. Hundreds of military personnel, young, old, some state, some not, and guest speaker was a 3-star general. Went back and forth. I still think it was not a good idea, especially since that person was up for election, and that person was recognized, but not that he was up for election, but he was recognized for coming. What do you think? Is there an issue with that? Should there have been an issue with that? Should that have been, is it just, hey, shouldn't have brought him there as a ethical dilemma, or is there like legal precedent that says that guy should never have been there because he was running campaign for office, he was at a military event, and it seemed like we endorsed him by mentioning his name, that because he supported military.
was he currently an elected official just up for re-election?
Yeah.
You're in gray area. You're in a lot of, I mean, again,
I'm gonna tell you what happened when I was in Command Chapel in Arizona in 2000. John McCain came on base, and he sort of went around shaking everybody's hand, and he talked to the troops in the hangar and all of that. But he was in campaign mode at that point, the primary. But he was already a sitting senator. Arizona's his state, so I guess that was the reason why he could come on base.
there is a provision in here, and I'm trying to find it, that says that if you know that there is a elected official who's coming on base, then you do need to notify the Department of Defense. I'm sorry, I don't know that one by heart, but it's a gray area. It really is a gray area, because what the campaign is going to argue is that he is there in his official capacity working on military issues. What his opponent's going to argue, he or she's going to say, is, no, you were campaigning on a military installation, which is illegal. Is anybody going to go to court over it? Probably not, but should you be smart about this? Absolutely. Okay.
Okay, so obviously you're saying that you can't campaign on military installations. So my question is, if you want to do some volunteer work or visit service members in the hospital and you're an elected official, are you able to do that, or is that a gray area?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, if you're just trying to visit people,
Yeah.
I mean, obviously you're an elected official, so people can say,
Yes.
weird kind of things. If
No.
you're actually doing it,
No, if you're going and you're visiting a service member at Walter Reed or Bethesda, you can do that. Absolutely. I mean, and
The larger question is how do we define campaigning? I think that's what all this has come down to. That's
Yeah.
all these things could be campaigning. Is tweeting campaigning? Is talking to your campaign manager campaigning? And is sort of visiting somebody in the hospital? And I think you can. What the impression I've gotten from seeing how this has worked is, if you need to obviously be conservative, but most of the time when people get in trouble for it, it's a fairly bright line.
Yep.
Like here you are as the primary graphic on your campaign literature, and there is no disclaimer on there. and it's like, send a Marine to Washington to fix the problem. And this person is still in the reserves. That's when this stuff comes up. Not some of the things where it's like, oh, he visits somebody, can you go speak at a ceremony? Those things you can do whether these things what you do whether you're on a campaign or not. If you're not on a campaign, would you still be going to visit people in the hospital? Sure. Or go speak at a ceremony? Sure.
But what I would recommend you do, regardless if you're a Republican or if you're a Democrat, make sure you keep in touch with your party leadership, because what you're doing in your own area could impact somebody else in another area, and you want to have a consistent policy, so make sure you're staying in close contact. I'm not giving you the answer you need because each one is going to be issue-specific, but just work your way through it and keep other people informed.
Every state party has an election lawyer, so you can always use that as a resource.
I would say that it seems to me that if you go into Walter Reed and you bring the TV cameras with you, you're in violation, because that's you're sort of electioneering there, campaigning. But if you go to Walter Reed and visit Wounded Warriors, and then later on in a speech or a debate you say, I've visited these soldiers and they're impressive people and blah blah blah. That's a different. You can bring that into a discussion, but you can't bring the photograph of you.
Well, actually, let me bring it back a step. The fact that you're going to try to bring press on is very interesting, because most military installations aren't going to let you bring on press unless they've approved it. Exactly, it's not going to happen.
Obama was sort of hit with this when he was launched. He wanted to take a visit of the hospital and launch, so he wanted to bring the press, and then the McCain campaign kind of hit him on that, so he canceled it. And then he didn't visit the Wounded Warriors.
Yeah.
So he was damned if he did, damned if he didn't.
McCain and Obama both did similar activities.
Yeah, they did.
So.
Well, first of all, do you really want to be the person standing next to a wounded veteran, and say, the only reason I'm standing next to you is because I want a photo? That's god-awful. I'm sorry, folks, but don't do that. That's just not nice. Okay? If you're going to go visit somebody in Landstuhl, you're going to go visit them in Bethesda, you're doing it because you're concerned about them.
Exactly.
Okay? And that's, you've got to remember that. Otherwise, people...
Clear in here, it says you can't do open campaign.
Yeah, I mean...
You can't do,
You're just not allowed to do it, so just...
And DOD installations will let you come on board.
Right.
And do that. So,
But sitting senator, I mean, it's different
for a sitting senator, I worked for a sitting senator last year, and we did a tour of all the bases in the state. And then we went on base, no press, visited the soldiers, came off base, and then did a
Exactly.
political
Exactly.
Right off base. The soldiers were invited, and they came up in non-ACUs, sort of a town hall meeting, but it was a political one, but it was off base.
Right.
Guys, we could take this legal discussion on for several hours. The major point I want to get across here is that it's really, really complicated, and that there are certain things you definitely can't do, and certain things you definitely can do, and I would stay with the latter.
You mind if I do one more? Just two more things. Let me wrap
If you
this
have
up.
any other questions to that, if we just take them after the we'll have a 15-minute break, and Stacy, if you wouldn't mind just staying for that and asking
Absolutely.
Great.
Okay, there are a couple of other documents that you should keep with you, and I do apologize for it. Okay. In addition to this directive, you need to memorize it. There are a couple of other things that usually occur, is that you'll have memos coming out. There's a memo that came out signed by Ashton Carter that was dated June 19th, 2012, and it talked about civilian military personnel participate in political activities. Get a copy of it, okay? This is the overarching over DOD, and then you're going to have service-specific memos. Always carry these with you, regardless of whatever event. Carry them with you so when somebody comes up and challenges you, you can say, aha, look at this. So make sure you do that. The other part that I want you to remember is there are a couple of statutes. 10 U.S.C. 973, make sure you have that. 10 U.S.C. 888, make sure you have that document. And then...
Can I email this to the group?
Yes. All right, but the reason
You have the reference, that's the reference list.
Yes, and the reason, and I'm just going to be the lawyer and remind you of, these are the overarching federal statutes and policies. So that's, and to wrap up, make sure, because you are looking for states as well, that if you are going for a state office, that you are consistent with state laws and statutes. So you need to be consistent with state laws and statutes. And if there's one thing I've said over and over again, have a lawyer with you. Go to your state lawyer, your election law, or have somebody else with you, because it's going to be issue by issue. You can do this. There are ways to do this correctly, but just do it smartly. Okay? Thanks for having me.
Now, just as I mentioned, is going to have sort of a different frame of reference for this. But if you could just sort of talk about not just legal, but maybe start with legal, but other obstacles you've seen veteran candidates fall into, and how they overcome those.
Sure. I think the biggest obstacle right off the bat is what office you choose to run for as you start the electoral process. With a show of hands, how many people plan on running for local or state office? Okay. How many people plan on running for federal? All right. The majority of the people that raise their hands that are going to run for federal office will lose their campaign. I know that hits hard, and I've had a lot of people call me and disagree with me and get loud with me, and then after they've lost their campaign, they called me and said maybe I should have ran for state commissioner, maybe I should have ran for county commissioner or state representative. The reality is that something like 98+% people that run for Congress right off the bat lose their first election. And that's just the reality, and that's something you have to tackle. And I understand that the running for Congress is a lot more appealing, because what do we care about as veterans? We care about decisions on foreign policy, we care about war, we care about kind of big pie in the sky decisions that your county commissioner or your local mayor doesn't necessarily implement on a daily basis. But I'll tell you what running for a local office does do. It allows you to get your name ID up. It allows you to cultivate a fundraising base. It allows you to learn how to be an elected official and learn how to be a candidate. So when you do decide to take that next step, you're in a much better position to be somewhere where you can actually achieve the mission. So I would encourage all of you, unless you're a multi-millionaire and have the money already in your pocket, to strongly consider running for a local office. You need to raise $250,000 for anyone even looks at you. If you haven't went through your Google Docs, Google Contacts, put a price tag by everybody's name, your mother, your father, sister, brother, your close friends, and kind of mapped out how much money you think they can afford to give you, and it doesn't get anywhere close to $250,000, you're probably not in a position where you can win. Running a federal PAC, that's a problem we saw over and over and over again. We would have candidates call and want to run for federal office right off the bat, and there was one thing that I just couldn't get over. I just remember wishing, I wish you would have been a local mayor, I wish you would have been a state rep, I wish you would have been a city commissioner before you decided to take this leap. So that's one of the biggest struggles, and I realize why federal office is so much more appealing. But the reality is that just like everyone else, you have to step up that ladder. And something else to consider is if you've recently separated from military service, you don't necessarily have the constituents you need to win. You don't necessarily have the fundraising base you need to win. You don't have a lot of the things that person that got out of college and has been running for office since the day they graduated high school. Although that's not fair, and you have served your country and you've kind of walked the walk and you've done it in a selfless way, they're in a much better position to win than you are. And also I want to say, and Seth touched on this quite a bit, you can't run as simply a veteran. Because at the end of the day, what do people care about? They care about the economy. They care about putting food on the table. They care about taking care of their family. They care about health benefits. They care about Social Security. And somewhere down the line, after those, they start caring about the wars. And now that we're pulling out of Afghanistan and we've almost completely pulled out of Iraq, that's pretty far down the totem pole. And as Seth mentioned, being a veteran, that military service is only a part of the picture. That's your profile, that's who you are, that's kind of the image you're projecting, and it's a big part. I run a small federal PAC, and I run a program called the Defense Council, and I believe that veterans have a place, and there's one thing that I kind of want to emphasize that puts you above the rest at the end of the day. When I was working on the Obama campaign in 2008, I was working in the most conservative district in the state of Florida. It's where Bud Day's from, the guy that was kind of spearheaded the SWIFT votes against John Kerry. And I was talking to a janitor, and he said, I really don't think Obama's a Christian. And, I was thinking, well, that's ludicrous. He grew up in the church. He was a community organizer coming out of the church. But, of course, I didn't tell him he was ludicrous. And I asked him why he didn't think he was a Christian, really try to get down to the roots of, where he was coming from. Because at the end of the day, people have opinions because of their own personal experiences or a lack of knowledge, or knowledge in a certain area. And most of what he said I didn't agree with. And then he said something that really stuck to me, and something that I've carried with me throughout my time in politics. He said, well, I really can't vote for anyone that doesn't believe in God. And I said, why is that? He said, because they need to report to somebody higher than themselves. And if there's no one that they're reporting to, I don't trust them running our country. And I get that. And one thing I can say we've all done as veterans, we've all had selfless service. Because at the end of the day, when you're elected to office, you can only hope that your elected representatives make the right decisions on your behalf. But if you're a veteran, you can go out there and say, I've been out there and I've served my country and I've done it in a selfless way, and I believed in something greater than myself, and I've been willing to put my life on the line to protect it. And that's something people can believe in. And I think that's something everyone in this room has, and something that's very unique. Did anyone have any questions about everything I just said?
Well, you talk a little about the strategy you make within your PAC, how you invest into candidates' PACs.
Yeah, it's really tough, because unlike a lot of PACs where they have a certain model that's easy to have a winning margin at the end of the day, the reality is there's a lot of veterans running, and if you endorse every single one of them, you're going to have a pretty low return on investment. So originally when I started, I would only donate to veterans. And as you saw by the makeup between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, there's about half as many veterans in the Democratic Party currently. So if they were incumbent, I would always donate to them, as long as they were good on veteran issues. Not all veterans are good on veteran issues. One of the biggest proponents against the new GI Bill was Senator John McCain. And they did a big ceremony, and George Bush congratulated him on spearheading that, but in reality, he campaigned against it for an entire year. So if they were good on veteran issues, and they were good on national security issues, we would donate to them automatically, because chances are they're going to be reelected. We would look at things like the Cook Report, Politico, and kind of see where they are. If they're in a 3 to 5 point margin either way, we would always donate to them. But there's certain people like Tommy Sowers, which is great, and he's now the Assistant Secretary of the VA. I would have never donated to Tommy Sowers because I approached in more data-driven solutions. So it's more about viability and whether or not they're right on the issues.
So how do you pick the non-incumbents?
Right. Well, if they're a serious challenger, there's going to be polls. There's polls that have been done on their race that says whether or not they have a shot. There's always going to be people that myself or other people are going to kind of the long shots. Tulsi Gabbard was one of them. I donated it, or my PAC donated to Tulsi Gabbard. I think 7 or 8 months in when she had 20% of the vote. But there was just something about her where I knew that she was going to somehow pull this off, and she won by 30-plus points.
And she had that local experience too that you said.
She did.
Right?
She had the local experience. She had been raised there. She was in the reserve. She would always come back to there, and she had a fundraising base. And she had the best grassroots campaign that I saw out of anyone the entire election cycle. So there's certainly going to be long shots, but at the end of the day, whether it be my PAC or someone else's PAC, unless you're a viable candidate, it doesn't matter how much they like you, whether or not they agree with you 100% of the time, they're not going to donate to you. Because there's a limited amount of money, and they have to choose where they send it wisely.
Please.
What's a good springboard office to run for before you run for Congress, like on a state level? Would it be like Secretary of State or Lieutenant Governor or some of those?
Yeah, no. It would be state representative, and if you're really popular, maybe state senator. I wouldn't recommend ever running for an elected office unless you're General Wesley Clark or someone of that nature that already has national recognition.
You said federal office?
Or state office, sorry, or federal office. And I would even look at running for city commissioner. Maybe mayor if you're in a really small town, or something of that nature. There's other offices.
Why not Secretary of State of the state?
Yeah, there are people that have done it. There's a Secretary of State, Jason Kander. I think he's a captain in the Army or something. He was able to pull that off. He was involved with politics beforehand. But it takes millions of dollars to run for a state office. So it's more about having the votes, having the name ID, and having the money to win. Because at the end of the day, especially when you're running for state offices like Secretary of State, whether you're on a governor's ticket, people generally don't care about them as much. So it's more about name recognition. Are you going to have the money to do the commercials where people are going to know who you are, know something about you, and be willing to fill in that bubble?
And just to piggyback on that, Patrick Murphy, just to give you a perspective of how big these offices are. You don't really hear a lot about the state attorney general, or secretary of state, or lieutenant governor. But Patrick Murphy, lost his race in 2010. He'd been in Congress for 4 years. In 2012, ran for attorney general for Pennsylvania, and lost the primary. There's a whole bit of story behind that, but I mean, even as a former member of Congress, it wasn't enough that he'd already been a congressman to get him attorney general. So that's sort of a level of how important some of these statewide offices are. Michael?
One of the challenges, obviously, you mentioned it, of being a veteran is you don't have the benefit of having lived in the community. The regulations, the laws, and so forth can prohibit what we can do politically while we're on active duty. What advice would you give before we make a run for any office, be it state or federal, to become known by the county or state political parties that we want to affiliate with? How do we break in to that community short of elected office?
Yeah, that's a great question. I ran a state house campaign from start to finish. And these things are very important, who you're involved with, how you get your name ID up before you run for office. I would say, get involved with your local chamber of commerce. If you're a Democrat or if you're an environmentalist, get involved with your local environmental organization. Get involved with your local county party, and start getting your name out that way. There's also certain careers that allow you to have a larger constituent before you start, like professor. There's a lot of people that go through your classroom. There are certain careers, maybe you're a news anchor, that allow you to have a larger audience before you actually run for office. So think about that. Yeah, pastor. That's a big one. I think a place where Democrats fall really short a lot of times, not as much in the South, but we forget how important the church is. And whether you're a Christian or not, and I think the vast majority of Democrats that are elected are, it's important to be involved with your local church. It's important to have a congregation. It's important to understand the rules of campaigning in a church, which is a whole different presentation. But churches are vitally important, and having that stage to speak on and get your name out there beforehand is very important.
What about experience as a personal or professional staffer before running for office?
Yeah.
Would you recommend that?
I think it's a good thing. You know, you certainly understand the process. One of the biggest challenges for anyone that's running for office is, you know, they get their name out there, they get really giddy, they start seeing their names on yard signs, and when that first, you know, attack comes, it knocks them over. They don't know what to do. They've never been smeared, you know, in public outside of high school. So, you know, being, you know, working in the political system, the elected or in an elected office beforehand, kind of maps out the realities of what you actually have to go through. There are some setbacks. I've worked with members that were professional staffers, that were campaign pros, and then they decided to run for office. And you kind of have the problem where you know everything, and you're somewhat you're somewhat scared to let your campaign staff do their job. So the reality is you can't run a campaign by yourself. I mean, that's another thing. You really need to think about who your friends are. And you need to have those people close around you, because you're going to make mistakes. And you need people that are going to be there to correct you along the way, and that are not going to throw you under the bus.
Jason?
The PACs, what are your PAC and some of the other veteran PACs? My understanding is they give a lot of money to, you know, incumbents, but people in high political offices such as Congress and Senate.
Mm-hmm.
How often do the PACs actually give to local races, like mayor or city commissioner?
Yeah.
Do y'all give any money to
That's a good question. Well, there's two types of PAC. Well, there's more than two types of PAC. There's two main types of PACs. There's a federal PAC and then there's a state PAC. Some state PACs can give to other state candidates, but the majority of them can only give to candidates within that state. There's also leadership PACs, and there's a whole bunch of different types of PACs. But if you're running for a local office, you need to look for states that operate within, or PACs that operate within your states. So, you know, I'm from Florida, so Equality Florida, which is a LGBT PAC, they only give money to state representatives and state senators. So you would look towards those PACs, because the federal PACs won't be allowed to, won't be able to do much for you.
And also, I just say that the federal, the help from the party, the DLC. Do you work with the DLCC, John Winston, and those people? They really focus on state campaigns, but their big thing is they only care about 10 states, because they want to change the balance of power, and there are only certain states where that's going to happen. You know, there's some states that are blue and some states that are red, and the ones that are 10 that are in the middle may have a state house that's, and within that they only care about the few state offices that can get flipped. So getting into that federal help for a state level office is a little more difficult. And I want to say one thing on top of that is from a fundraising point of view, if you're going for a state level office, it's a lot, or local office, it's a lot less of a fundraising issue. Blair, how much again did you say you spent on your mayoral campaign?
About $50,000.
Okay. All right. So something I've heard of a couple people doing who have more than just maybe 2 years, 20 years ago in the Marine Corps or something like that, is, they say, well, I don't have much of a fundraising base, but I do have, we as veterans generally stay in touch somehow, especially with the advent of email and Facebook and so forth. And I bet everybody here could find somebody from each unit they were with when they were in. And a couple people have done something where they've tasked, sort of brought some people in for each one of these units and say, hey, I need you all to raise $1,000. The first, see if you can get 10 people from that unit to give us my campaign $100. We'd be willing to do that for me. And they've gone out and sort of done that and said, all right, hey, remember Justin Ford, from back when we were in Iraq together? Yeah, that dude, he's running for mayor. Can you believe that? And people will be like, wow, I'll actually pay money just to see him fall on his ass. Because that's how we are. And it actually has built up. Maybe you can get, even in 5 units, you get maybe $1,000, $1,500 from each. $500 to $10,000, which is a perfectly respectable amount of seed money for a local campaign. Mm-hmm. And so I put that out to you, that even if you don't have the same big donors, you actually do have a pretty loyal network of people that you could reach to that will help you out.
Yeah.
I think Chad, you had a question.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, as far as in looking how to get your grassroots network out there to run for office. So I'm pretty active in community service and those type of things. So I don't want to quite say community organizer, shit. But so getting access to people through that is that a good way to go about it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's any community organization is a good thing. You have to be smart about how you spend your time and effort, because some are going to be much more viable and much more fluent than others. But certainly being involved in any community organization is a good thing. One thing I do want to say, which is vitally important, that unless you work substantially in politics, you might not have a clear understanding of, is how to track the people you know. Because at the end of the day, you're going to say, well, I know so-and-so over there, and I know so-and-so over there, but you need to start tracking the people you know way before you start running for office. And this may sound a little creepy, but I have a couple thousand people in my Google, and I have their positions, where they work, where I met them, their address, every bit of information I could get about them from the get-go, and I just put them in there. So every single week, I take every single business card I had, or the ones that I think are important, and I upload them into my personal contacts. When I was raising money for my PAC, I even took it a step farther. I would have all the organizations and the people of influence in this Excel sheet. I would have them color-coded by the type of relationship I had with them. And then I had two constituency tabs. Well, they're involved in law and they're involved in politics, or they're involved in business, or they're involved in this. And then I would have follow-up notes. So you kind of have to be anal about it and be almost on creepy status to really get the job done.
Yeah. Okay, a couple of lessons learned for you guys. First, thank you cards. I don't want to sound like Miss Manners here, but you would be amazed what thank you cards can get you. And make sure they're handwritten. It can be no more than just a couple of sentences. But I can't tell you how many donors I've talked to said, I am not donating to that campaign again, because they didn't even bother to say thank you the first time before they asked me for money the second time. So thank you cards is your really big issue. A couple of others, and I kind of see we're all aged contemporary. Hit your PTAs up. I can't tell you. I mean, we've been involved in a local race here in D.C. The PTA is helping. I couldn't believe it. You'd be surprised. Your PTAs, your Girl Scouts, your Boy Scouts. Most of you are probably in the baseball ring. If you're not in the baseball ring, then you're in the ballet circuit. If you're not in the ballet circuit, then you're in the soccer circuit. You would be amazed at how many parents would be willing to help you, because they're sitting next to you for 2 hours on a Saturday afternoon. Chat them up. Chat them up and say, hey, this is what I'm doing. Can you help me? And they're going to help you. And I can't underestimate, because I do come from the South, the power of the church. The chaplain back here mentioned that. Okay. In the South, if you are going to want to be elected, you are going to church. If you're not going to church, you're going to synagogue. If you're not going to synagogue, you're going somewhere else. But you had better be there on a Sunday. And you better know the chaplain. And by the way, when you go to church and you talk to the chaplain ahead of time. You just don't waltz into church and go, I'm here. There are a lot of politics involved with the church, and I recognize, and it's Protestant, Catholic, it can be Jewish, Muslim, anything. But it is a huge presence in the South, so I highly recommend that you do that. And then the other issue for you, these are just a couple of issues, because I've worked in the military and other issues. You have some tangential issues that can give you constituents that you may not be thinking about. Transportation. There is a big issue right now with a lot of these folks coming off of military service. They already have the education. They've already been truck drivers. They've already been ship drivers. They've already know how to move assets. But the federal government and the state government doesn't recognize their experience. So there has been a movement afoot to make sure that we can change state and federal laws to make sure they can get those access. That is a podium for you. That is a platform that you can do of how do you change some of the existing statutes and regs so that people don't have to become requalified. Another issue that has been really hot within the military community right now is education. Most of you know that you're transferred from, if you're in a place for 2 to 4 years, that you can get education in one place, but it may not apply in another place. That has been a very sexy topic of how do you work within the university systems within your state and also between states so that your education is recognized if you go from one university or one community college. And it's not only education that way, but it's the education that you receive in the military. That is becoming a very hot topic, not only for dependents, for your children, but for your spouse and for you yourself. So it's a platform for you to use. The last one is the unions. There has been a very interesting issue that's going on, and it's something that I've been working on in my private capacity, is talking about the transport of military assets coming home from Iraq and Afghanistan. A lot of these items are supposed to be on U.S. vessels, but they're not. Some folks are trying to put them on foreign vessels, and that's why the unions are getting very concerned about how all of this stuff is being moved. Talk to your local unions, because they're going to be very interested in how you could help them on the state level as well as on the federal level. It's not directly a veterans issue, but because you are a veteran and you understand how the logistics chains of items, they are going to be very supportive of you. It's going to be hot over the next couple of years.
Did you have a question, sir?
For Justin, about, you answered the question about giving the non-incumbents, but does your PAC, or I guess two questions, in your campaign experience, about having a key member of the finance staff that deals specifically with PACs? Would you recommend that? And does your PAC give to candidates running in a primary before the nominee?
Yeah. The first question, I think that it certainly depends what office you're running for. The finance director is by far the most important person on your campaign, outside of the campaign manager, and your first hire. But unless you're running for congressional office or higher, I wouldn't hire someone individually just to do PAC fundraising. If you are running for Congress or for Senate, you can raise millions of dollars off of PAC contributions. And here's another thing. Don't be one of those people that says, I'm not going to take PAC contributions. And I know it sounds crooked and there's a lot of, it doesn't feel right. It makes you feel a little bit dirty. But chances are, if you don't take those PAC contributions, you're not going to raise enough money to win. Just because you take a PAC contribution doesn't mean you're not going to do the right thing. People that have been very successful in politics rarely turn away money. So remember that. And your second question, what was it again?
About giving to prior to winning the nomination. You're giving for full primary.
Yeah. A lot of PACs in general, you generally have PACs that are on the right, on the left, and then you have PACs that will donate to anyone that supports their issues. Most PACs that are on the right or the left, they generally don't get involved in primaries. My PAC was a little bit different. I didn't so much care who I upset. I try to think of myself as a veteran patriot before I think of myself as a politico. But you know what, at the end of the day, that probably hurt me along the way. But that's okay. That's a sacrifice I thought about. But a lot of PACs won't get involved in primaries. You're more likely to get establishment money if you're running in a swing district and you're the chosen primary candidate. So you've already won your primary, you're running against a Republican or a Democrat, and then the party is going to start throwing money at you. But very often you have to get yourself over that initial hump.
All right, last question, Tammy?
Oh, this is for Justin. Can you talk on how to assess the
I can't really hear you, sorry.
This is for Justin. How to assess the environment and political landscape of the area that you're running in? Because sometimes we tend not to do that, but it's important that we really assess that, the environment and political landscape, the area that we're running in. Because there's always an undercurrent, and sometimes we don't do the necessary research before we say we're going to run for this office.
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of people think that they're a great candidate and they can win in any district, and that's simply not the case. You need to be in a politically viable district. And the way you do that, you go to your state elections department, whatever it's called. You look up the margins. If you're not within a few percent either way, you probably shouldn't run in that district. So that's something you should certainly think about before you have a place of residency, because it's very likely that, you know, you're currently living in an apartment, and you go 3 blocks the other way, and all of a sudden you're in a winnable district. But if you file to run for office in this apartment, 3 blocks that way, you're in an unwinnable district. So, you know, if you don't understand how to kind of look at those analytics, get somebody that does, and that's one of the first things you should consider out the box.
Hey, big hand for this panel, thanks.